This is the sound of a world that never was. No air raid sirens, no drone of Spitfires overhead, just silence over London, broken only by the rumble of German trucks on English soil. History remembers the Battle of Britain as England's finest hour, but what if the hour never came? The divergence begins with a single decision. In early September 1940, the Luftwaffe's High Command, frustrated by mounting losses, changes its targeting strategy. Instead of continuing the assault on RAF airfields and sector stations, they shift their weight to London. In our timeline, that shift was a fateful error, giving Fighter Command a chance to breathe. But here, the move happens 3 days earlier, when the RAF's southern bases are already bleeding. The bombers hit Biggin Hill, Kenley and Hornchurch in one coordinated wave on September 6th. The radar stations at Dover, Beachy Head and Ventnor go dark. By September 10th, the Luftwaffe has achieved air superiority over the Channel. If you could see this timeline, which alternate history would you want us to explore next? Drop your choice in the comments and hit subscribe so you don't miss the fallout. The Royal Navy, still the most powerful surface fleet in Europe, is now a paper tiger. Without air cover, a destroyer is a floating coffin. Operation Sea Lion, once a theoretical plan, becomes a grim reality. Invasion barges, 2,000 of them, begin crossing on the night of September 15th. They are packed with 40 divisions, 6,500 horses, and enough artillery to level a city. The British Army, stripped of heavy equipment after Dunkirk, fights delaying actions on the beaches of Kent and Sussex. But without control of the sky, they cannot hold. The first German troops wade ashore at Pevensey Bay before dawn on September 17th. The War Cabinet had a contingency plan, codenamed Black Move. It was meant to be a secret evacuation of the monarchy and government to Canada. Now it becomes the only option. On September 20th, King George VI, his family, and Winston Churchill board a destroyer in Liverpool, bound for Belfast and then Halifax. Behind them, London falls under a new flag. The BBC's last broadcast from occupied Britain is a piano rendition of Rule Britannia, then static. In the weeks that follow, the British military scuttles what remains of the home fleet at Scapa Flow to prevent capture. The Royal Navy, the instrument that had ruled the waves for centuries, sinks beneath the cold waters of the Orkney Islands. A puppet government is installed in London, led by Sir Oswald Mosley, who broadcasts speeches praising the new order. Resistance cells form in the Welsh valleys and Scottish Highlands, but they are fragmented, starved of supplies. The empire, meanwhile, fractures. Canada becomes the seat of the exiled government. Australia and New Zealand look to the United States for protection. India's independence movement accelerates, seeing British weakness. The long arc of the war bends in ways that still shock us. Without Britain as an unsinkable aircraft carrier, the Allies have no base for a Western front. The invasion of North Africa is postponed. The bombing campaign against Germany is crippled. Hitler, now secure in the West, turns east. Operation Barbarossa launches in June 1941, but with 500,000 fewer troops needed for occupation duty in Britain. The Red Army, already battered, faces a Wehrmacht that is fresher, stronger, and more focused. Moscow falls in December 1941. Leningrad starves. The Soviet Union collapses into a rump state beyond the Urals, and yet the war does not end. The United States, now the sole remaining democratic power, pours resources into the Manhattan Project. Without a British partner, the atomic bomb is developed in secret, tested in New Mexico, and then, instead of Hiroshima, a B-29 carries a single device to Berlin in March 1946. The city is erased. Germany surrenders within weeks, but the Soviet Union, which had already signed a separate peace with Germany in 1943, occupies all of Germany east of the Rhine. The Cold War begins not with the Iron Curtain descending on Eastern Europe, but with Stalin's armies standing at the English Channel. The world that emerges is not one of Nazi triumph, it is one of a longer, darker struggle. Britain is a ghost nation, its government operating from Ottawa, its people subjected to a brutal occupation that lasts until 1948, when a combined American-Canadian force finally liberates the islands. But the damage is done. The empire is gone. The monarchy returns to a shattered kingdom. And the greatest irony remains. The decision to shift the Luftwaffe's targets 3 days earlier did not win the war for Germany. It merely delayed the Allied victory at a cost of millions of lives and left Europe divided under a Soviet shadow that would last for decades. The hardest lesson of this alternate history is that the finest hour when it was denied did not vanish. It was postponed, transformed, and paid for in blood that our timeline never had to spend. History is fragile. One summer, one decision, one silence where there should have been Spitfires, and the shape of the world changes forever. When the liberation came in 1948, it was not the roaring tide of tanks and paratroopers that Londoners had dreamed of. It was slow, methodical, almost apologetic. American and Canadian divisions waded ashore at the same beaches where German boots had landed a decade earlier, but the fighting was bitter and close. The occupation had given the Wehrmacht time to fortify the coasts with concrete and steel, and the Royal Navy was a memory at the bottom of Scapa Flow. The liberation cost more than 80,000 Allied lives. When the first soldiers reached Trafalgar Square, they found Nelson's column still standing, but the lion statues were chipped and scarred, and someone had painted a swastika across the base. The silence that greeted them was not peace, it was exhaustion. King George VI returned to London in the autumn of 1948, stepping off a Canadian destroyer at a dock that had been hastily repaired. There was no cheering crowd. The streets were lined with people who watched in a hush, their faces hollow, their clothes patched. The monarch walked through his capital as if it were a cemetery. Buckingham Palace still stood, but the gates were buckled and the windows were boarded. Inside, the chandeliers had been looted, the portraits slashed. The throne room smelled of damp and smoke. He sat in a folding chair and wept. The first winter after liberation was the hardest. Coal was scarce, rationing tightened, the black market thrived, and in the countryside, farmers ploughed fields that still held rusted helmets and shell casings. Children played in bomb craters that had become ponds. The Spitfires never returned to the sky above Kent. The airfields were silent. The pilots were either dead or scattered across the dominions. A generation of young men who might have flown had grown up under occupation, learning German in schools, saluting a flag they hated. The sound of an aircraft engine overhead still made people flinch. Too many years of listening for the drone of bombers, the whistle of falling ordnance. That reflex never faded, not entirely.